Hello everyone, great to see you all. My name's Nikolai, I'm the Artistic Director here at Curve Theatre in Leicester and really excited to be directing this year's production of The Wizard of Oz. We're really thrilled that you're interested in the design process and what it is like putting together a huge production like this. So really glad to have you here with us today and glad that you can join us for this part of the journey. So Wizard of Oz, we actually started working on before the pandemic. So we've been planning and imagining and dreaming about this production for nearly 4 years now, which feels like a lifetime. And we're really thrilled that at last, all of our ideas and this epic production is going to come to fruition on stage at Curve this Christmas. So as I say, we started about 4 years ago. One of the first roles as director is to assemble a creative team. It's a bit like Avengers, ready to assemble, and we choose who we think might be right, who are the designers, the costume designers, in this case, projection designer, choreographer, musical team, bringing everybody together to help realise this production on stage. And one of the key relationships with the director is the designer, in this case, Colin Richmond. Working alongside Colin Richmond is our projection designer. You'll see when we get into the model box, a large element of this production is done with projection and LED screens, conjuring this magical world. And then we also have a costume designer, Rachel Canning, an incredible choreographer, Shay Barkley, and that's really the sort of key team, if you like. Then when we get into technical rehearsals a bit further on the journey, we've got Ben Cracknell, who's our lighting designer, and Adam Fisher, our sound designer. But I'm going to talk you through the set today. What we're doing today, when we've done this before, we've actually been with the model box. Now the model box is 1 to 25 in scale. So if you can imagine a model of a person or a model of a building, it's 25 times smaller than reality. And this allows myself and the choreographer and the scenic designer to sort of really get into the model box, which is like a doll's house, and move elements of scenery around, imagine how a production will flow, imagine how we get from one scene to the next. Now, because we're quite late on in this process, the model has all been finished, it's all been signed off by our production teams, and it's actually in the workshop being made. And our production of Wizard of Oz is so vast and so enormous that it's actually been made at various workshops around the country. I think one down in Plymouth, one up in Nottingham. So that is actually being built at the moment. So what we've got is the model going to be projected on this screen behind me. So we won't quite be going inside it, but we'll hopefully give you a bit of a flavour and introduction to the process. Now, as I say, we started about 4 years ago, and I think Wizard of Oz is quite an overwhelming title to sort of get your head round as a director. There have been so many versions of this play, so many different interpretations. And I think because the play deals a lot in fantasy, and Dorothy obviously visits this magical world of Oz and the Emerald City and is swept up in tornadoes and meets these incredible characters, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Lion, the Wicked Witch, Glinda the Good Witch, the wonderful sort of wizard himself. I think there can be a temptation for maybe a director, the creative team, to sort of feel that in order to elevate and to set that material free, you need to sort of be even more magical, even more imaginative, and lay on extra layers of imagination and magic, if you like, onto a story which is already very magical and very broad in its sort of imaginative canvas. And so what I did as director sort of very early on in the process was go back to the novel, back to the source material, and to really dig down into what the writer was saying originally, and maybe think about the political landscape, the ideas, the humanity that's already inherent in the source material, so that when you're building a visual language for the play and when you're trying to tell that story in a three-dimensional way on stage, we were remaining true to the source material and enhancing it rather than imposing onto it a director's vision or a designer's vision, which might stifle what is already a really imaginative and wildly creative story. And that might sound a bit sort of anti-theatre, if you like, and a bit sort of anti what the directors and the designers' usual job is. But I guess I felt quite strongly early on in the process that it's such a rich tapestry, it's so imaginative, this world is so evocative already on the page, that if we start to add too many layers on top of that, possibly we stifle the story and start to lose the vibrancy and the clarity, the purity, the brilliance of what Frank L. Baum, the original writer, intended. So I hope what we've created is a really clear, imaginative, beautiful, evocative world, which is a response to that original source material. So what we always start with in a process is research. So I read a lot, obviously in this case the original book, and our designer Colin Richmond starts to put together a sort of storyboard, a canvas of different sort of photographs, images, pieces of art which maybe speak to us and help sort of unlock some of the ideas of the play. Now, our novel is written at the turn of the 19th century, where we meet Dorothy and her adopted family in Dust Bowl, America. They're struggling farmers. They are battling with a very dry, arid land and trying to farm that landscape and create food out of it. And we felt that rather than anchoring the play in that time period to begin with, we felt the depression of the 1930s was a sort of more vivid and a better anchor to sort of start our play. And in the novel, we have this image from the film of it being sort of black and white and sepia. And of course, in the novel, we're given a reality to why the land is barren, why it is stripped of colour. And that is, of course, because there's been no rain and the farming community are struggling to grow things out of the land and to care for their animals. And the depression felt like a really good anchor point for that. And we looked at a photographer called Dorothea Lange, Lange, who might be worth you guys having a look at. And Dorothea Lange, during the Great Depression of America, photographed rural communities and documented this period in American history. And so it felt like a really good point to anchor our story. And obviously, you always want to make theatre and create theatre that not only entertains, and especially like with our Christmas show, we want to sort of blow the roof off Curve and give you all an amazingly magical and exciting time. But it also feels really important that the play speaks to us today and has something to say possibly about our communities, our society, the world we live in today. And so, sadly, in many ways, it felt that the sort of the reflection, the mirror back on the Great Depression and recession, it felt like it sort of had a key and a link to our world today. And as a director, you don't to be didactic, you don't to feel like you're sort of giving a history lesson. As the audience, you want the audience to have room to breathe and to maybe think about, how the world of this play might change their perception of our community, our society today. But it felt like a really clear link to, where we are today, and many of the challenges around poverty and food banks and the environment that we're faced with in the 21st century, and how the characters in this play, both the sort of turn of the 19th century and then the Great Depression in the 1930s, how all of those things are sort of linked, and they have quite an interesting sort of resonance. So check out the photographs of Dorothea Lange, and you can see some of the research that Colin and I sort of did very early on in starting to paint the picture of Dorothy and the community that she exists within at the beginning of our play. Once we'd done our research, we started to think a bit more in detail about, Dorothy's house, and this is the sort of image that we conjured up. And you'll see that when we get into the model box, what we have is a series of portals which sort of bring your eye, what you sort of traditionally call wings, and they bring your eye as the audience into this world. And at the front of the model here, it's hard to see, and you won't even really got to sort of get a sense of it when you're in the theatre, but we have what's called a gauze, a front cloth. And the gauze, when you put what's called a blinder behind it, which is like a full curtain, allows the surface to be opaque, so you can't see through it. So here, when the audience enter the auditorium, you can see a depiction of Dorothy's farmhouse, the house where the Gale family live, and that will be projected onto the front of the gauze, and you won't see beyond it. And then as we move through the overture and move through into the beginning of the play, we're able to fly out the blinder, which then means the gauze, which is this beautifully sort of knitted material, it allows you to, what we call, bleed through the gauze. And then what happens is we can see a world beyond beyond the front curtain. And then you can just see in the background here, we'll zoom in a little bit, and what you saw projected onto the front of the cloth, you can now see in miniature in the background. And so what Colin, the designer, is doing, and what Douglas is doing, and sort of came from an initial idea from me, is that we're treating this landscape and the world of our play in a very filmic way. So we're imagining the camera is sort of seeing a great big close-up of the Gale house at the beginning, and then as the overture settles, we then sort of move really into the world of the play, and we can see this sort of little model house in the background. What you can also see here are these amazing portals which we've talked about. In the model, they look white and they don't have seemingly any colour to them or any life to them. But again, that's where the projection designer, Douglas O'Connell, really comes into his own. And through the magic of projection and light and colour, you can see then that we are projecting vistas onto the portals. So you can see this amazing sort of windmill, which is there on portal 1. And then right at the back here, we have an LED wall. So you imagine those amazing LED walls you see on the X Factor. We've got one of those deep upstage. And this is what's really interesting as a director, because obviously a lot of my work is working with actors and, you know, shaping dramaturgically a play and a script and working with the writers, in this case Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice and Jeremy Sams, who have crafted this new version of The Wizard of Oz. But also in my role as a director, what I really enjoy are the technical elements. and the way that over the last sort of 20 years I've been working as a director, technology has advanced, and what we're able to do on stage now is really incredible. So you've heard me talk a lot about the projection. So on all of those portals there that are moving from downstage, moving away from the audience, and the perspective is getting smaller and smaller, those portals are projected onto. Now, upstage, we have this amazing LED wall. So you're mixing technology, the LED wall, which is like super sharp, super contemporary, super modern, and then the more traditional elements of projection, which is projected onto those white portals, which you heard me talk about earlier. And that's really exciting. And then into all of that, we're also adding scenic elements. So you can see now, upstage, we have this real depiction of the house. So you saw that projected onto the front screen originally, and now Colin has created this amazing, huge, life-size version of the house, which trucks on automated tracks in the floor upstage. So again, that idea as a director, a designer, as a stage manager working in the theatre, you're dealing with projection, you're dealing with LED walls, you're dealing with automated, so computerized automation, so tracks in the floor, which can make this little gate post downstage right here, or the house upstage, move on and off the space. And so, as I say, that idea of filmically moving, manipulating this world. You're thinking about the images that Douglas is projecting onto the LED wall. You're thinking about how we're moving, orchestrating with music and the actors and the choreographer around the space, all of these elements to tell this story in the sort of most clear and authentic way possible, really. So that's a little bit about the world of Kansas and the Dust Bowl that we discover our heroine, Dorothy Gale, in. Along the way, we sort of journey through Kansas, and we meet this guy, the professor, before Dorothy is swept up in a huge tornado and carried off to the land of Oz. And let me see here, you can see some images of the tornado. Now, this, from a directorial point of view, a choreographic point of view, projection, lighting, sound, scenery, everything coalesces. And what we're doing at the moment, before we go into rehearsals, is working on the projection. Douglas is creating animations. He's emailing them to me. I'm feeding back, working with the automation designers, thinking about how we integrate projection, sound, light, real actors, and scenic elements to create what really is one of the most iconic moments if you're doing a production of The Wizard of Oz, which is this great tornado, which of course transports Dorothy off to this new land. And so I won't give too much away, because I'd love it that you're all going to come and see our production. But it really is, as I say, a huge challenge, and it's not something we can sort of wait until we get into rehearsals or the tech, to imagine the technical rehearsals, to imagine how all of this comes together. 6 months out, a month out now before we get to rehearsals, I'm storyboarding, working out bar for bar in the music, what's going to happen at each moment, what we're seeing really on stage in terms of what our actor, Georgina, who's playing Dorothy, is doing, what's happening scenically around her. We'll have a front gauze-in, which we're projecting onto. We've got a mid-stage gauze-in, which we're projecting onto. Upstage of that, we've got an LED wall, which is generating all of this imagery. And then around Georgina on the space, we've got scenery, which is trucking and whirling around her. And all of those technical elements, enhanced by the lighting and the sound, then come together to create the final sort of 30, 40 seconds worth of stage time, which will blow the audience's minds. But that is really months and months of preparation. So hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into that. When we arrive in the world of Oz, the first place we arrive is Munchkinland. And of course, what we then do is inject into the space a load of colour, because of course the barren world of Kansas, which is so run down because of the lack of water, the lack of nutrients in the soil, suddenly in the world of Oz we have this huge injection of colour, which, if you can imagine as an audience, you've seen the sort of sepia black and white tones of the projection, the costumes, which are all sort of sun-washed and drained of colour. This is a world where poverty and upcycling and recycling is the order of the day. It's not like today's throwaway culture where, we don't like something, or, clothes have lost its colour, we're throwing them away. In our world of Kansas, it's a much more brutal reality. And so it's finding the truth of all of that in that world before we then jump to Oz, where suddenly, imagine as an audience, your eyes are suddenly flooded with colour and the vibrancy and the lighting and the scenic design in the costume, which you won't have seen before. And that is there in the novel. That is all what the writer tells us to do. So again, it sort of goes back to that original idea of absolutely anchoring this really vivid, imaginative, heightened world in the truth that the writer has given us. And that's none so more is that true than when we first get to Munchkinland. And, everybody has images of Munchkinland from the movie, and has a sort of idea of this sort of joyous, jolly landscape, which, of course, our Munchkinland will be. But when you go back to the novel, the house, which has landed on this wicked witch and killed her, the witch is an autocratic leader. She's a despotic ruler who doesn't allow her munchkins, her community, to vote or to have democratic rights. And this is all in the novel. And so when Dorothy's house lands on the Wicked Witch, suddenly democracy and order is restored to this world. And so this idea of Ding Dong, the witch is dead, and the joy and the exuberance and the colour and the life we see in Munchkinland, that is all born out of the truth and the very real story that Baum was telling way back when. And so, again, you can see by going back to the source material, by really studying the words, the language, the characters, the world that the writer has immersed these characters in, you can not only tell a really interesting story that doesn't actually need much from the director or the designer or any of us to enhance, but if we tell that story with real integrity and truth, A, it's thrilling, but B, it really has a relevance and a resonance to the world today. And again, it connects that back to that idea of all of our work in the arts having a resonance and maybe inviting us to think about our world, our society, our community that we exist within today. And what's really exciting from a directorial point of view, and all of us working on the show, of course, is that we've got this amazingly vivid, magical story, but like all great children's literature, it does say something about the world today and maybe points towards the injustices and the challenges that we all face together in our community. So again, you see a very sort of vivid, very lively, imagine all of the projections all around the portals there, the colour and the projection on the back LED wall, all of the exuberant costumes, which I'll show you a little bit later on. But you can see it's rooted in a truth, so it's not just sort of frivolous for frivolous sake. I won't take you through everything because we obviously want to leave some nice surprises for when you come and see the show. Again, here are some images when we were sort of doing our research for the Munchkin community. We sort of imagined 1950s world, sort of this idea of, that sort of white picket fence, 2.4 children, the sort of formality and structure of American society after the war. And maybe on the surface it looks like there's a sort of a perfection and a sort of wholesomeness about that. But actually, if you scratch a little bit beneath the surface, you see that that's not quite the case, that there's a sort of dark underbelly to that sort of perfect vision of, the all-American 1950s world. And we also looked at a photographer called Alex Prager, Prager, sort of very contemporary, a photographer working today, but again, gave us a taste and sort of suggested the underbelly and possibly the corruption under that sort of all-American perfect veneer, which maybe isn't so perfect when you sort of scratch beneath the surface. And so again, using lots of contemporary artists, lots of research images you can see in the storyboard behind me, which really helped inform and inspire the physical design, the projection and the costume world. And as I say, it's interesting with The Wizard of Oz because you do need to make a choice, when we get to Oz, where is our yellow brick road? What is the sort of reality for us of this landscape? And so what we sort of started to think about was American iconography, and as I suppose a British person interested in American culture, I really enjoyed some of the iconography when you look at like 1950s American advertising and the way American capitalism and American culture really sort of created, billboards and television commercials, and the way, I suppose, the American dream, the ideology of that was packaged and sold, not just to the American nation, but I guess to the rest of the world. And this idea of the play being about a journey and who are you? Where do we belong? Where is home? And those seem to be the sort of central guiding ideas of the play. And what is within us? Where do we find our inner strength, our inner courage, our ability to love? And how do you define who you are and navigate finding your way in the world when you are being bombarded with imagery and consumerism and a sort of idea of what a perfect family is, ergo what we've discussed in Munchkinland, what an ideal version of a young woman is in a contemporary landscape. And when you're being bombarded with media and culture and advertising and sort of telling you what to think and how you should look, how do you navigate that world? And so I guess what we've done is we've placed our protagonist Dorothy and her friends, who are on this journey of self-discovery, both of self and of their community, and learning what home means for them within this sort of very aggressive sort of Americana cultural sort of world. And again, so it's decisions like that as a director and as a design team which sort of really anchor our version of the play, and not only hopefully create a really sort of vivid visual landscape for it to exist within, but also hopefully for you guys studying our production and the design world and all of that, demonstrate to you that these aren't sort of arbitrary decisions. We've not just sort of chosen some of this stuff because it looks really groovy and really cool, but it also has a sort of root in what we want you and the audience to maybe think about a little bit when we're presenting this play to you. And that even though The Wizard of Oz is going to be the most like entertaining, magical thing you've ever seen, it's also rooted in a sort of truth and a reality that makes us sort of think a bit about our world today. So you can see here, when we start our journey on the yellow brick road, we have this huge sort of Las Vegas neon Broadway $1 million light bulb sign which flies in, which says "You are here." And again, it's sort of this idea of playing with identity and where you belong, that you are here, but you are swamped by this enormous sort of advertising hoarding, which sort of makes you feel quite small and quite diddy within this world. And as I said right at the beginning, you know, this is all 25 times bigger in real life. So we're working at scale here, and you can sort of see down here we've got a motorbike for Glinda. The witches in our play don't sort of fly around on broomsticks. They ride around on full throttle motorbikes. There's a real sort of weight and dynamism to our witches. So again, it's playing with gender stereotypes, what we expect of women in this sort of literature, how they are traditionally depicted, and how, certainly working with our costume designer Rachel Canning and the wider team, how we're making sure that even though elements of our play take place in the 30s and the 1950s, we're very much approaching the narrative, the storytelling, the politic of it from a 21st century sensibility. And so we begin our journey on the yellow brick road. Again, you can see some of the research images that we've sort of found and had a look at. Here you can see this sort of idea of a huge corn can. So when we meet the Scarecrow for the first time, he's notionally in a cornfield, guarding the crops, or hopefully trying to guard the crops from the crows. But again, this idea of Americana, consumerism, capitalism, and that the cornfield is actually a row of corn cans which through the LED wall at the back will extend off as far as the eye can see. And again, this idea of sort of corrupting, if you like, a little bit the yellow brick road. If you zoom in a little bit down here, you can see we've got these like sort of surfboards, and they are these arrows which form the basis of our yellow brick road. So we've got this yellow brick road which can move around the space. It can shapeshift. These arrows can be guiding you on, but they can also be naughty arrows which suddenly change direction and with the choreographer swerve out of Dorothy and her friend's perspective and view. So the yellow brick road is somewhere magical, it's guiding us, but it's also somewhere where you have to be on your guard, and there's an element of danger to it as well. So again, thinking about sort of Americana and iconography within the sort of American dream and the American landscape, for me, the yellow brick road became a sort of allegory, a sort of metaphor for Route 66. Route 66, the first major highway, the first major motorway in America, connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. And as well as being a literal thoroughfare and a literal geographical, connecting of two places, within the sort of American mythology, it sort of becomes a place to dream and to get lost and to travel and to discover and for danger. where you could flee the trauma of the East Coast and New York and the city, and you could drive for days and discover yourself, and then arrive in the relative freedom of the West Coast. And so for us, the Yellow Brick Road is almost like, as I say, an allegory for Route 66. And again, you think of Route 66, the birth of the motel and the birth of advertising as you're hurtling down the motorway, seeing all of these signs, all of these images, all of these things we want you to buy and consume. It felt like a sort of good anchor post also for our Yellow Brick Road. And so that really forms the basis of the journey. And you can see here, this image is this beautifully vivid, colourful image is created by our projection designer, Douglas O'Connell, who's a wonderful filmmaker. And all of this projection I'm talking about, that will be constantly moving, constantly shape-shifting on the LED wall in the background. And so from a design point of view, again, we've got the image of the real person, the actor. We have the scenic elements. You saw the corn can, which was in the previous scene. That's on our automated trucks. You've got the projection on the portals, and then you've got the constantly moving background behind you. And so all of those elements, again, with the lighting, the colourful lighting when we get to Oz, the soundscape which Adam will create, all of those elements are constantly coalescing, colliding, collaborating to create our version of The Wizard of Oz. Again, you can see a bit of the Yellow Brick Road there. You can see the corn cans, the weird sort of corn growing out of the ground with its marketing and its sort of consumer, sort of already sort of part of it. Some more design images there. I won't show you everything. Here's a little bit of a projection for when we get to meet the Tin Man. We've created backstories for all of our friends who we meet in Oz. We imagine the Tin Man fought at the Battle of Passchendaele during the Great War, during World War I. And like so many servicemen and women across the ages, most recently we've seen it in Afghanistan, they lose limbs, they lose part of their physical function. And so the Tin Man has literally been put back together, having fought for his country during battle. And so we meet him now. He's working for Ozonium Oil. And of course, we later learn in our play that all of these industries, whether it's this Flying Monkey oil brand you see here, or the corn you saw when we met the Tin Man, all of these brands, if you like, are owned by the Wicked Witch of the West. And we've imagined her to almost be a sort of dictator who rules with an iron fist over her country and controls all of the money, all of the industries. And of course, when we get to the forest in Act 2, when our friends are lost in the haunted forest, in our play, it's an oil field where the oil is being extracted from the earth with these huge oil hammers, sort of literally drilling for oil, and there's flames, and it's a really scary, barren place. And so that all of the choices we're making here in Act 1, you will see how they sort of come to fruition in the story we're then telling when we get to the second half of the play. And again, this idea of the environment, consumerism, oil, the world's natural resources, without the production in any way being didactic or feeling like we're trying to give the audience a lesson, because we're not. But as creatives, as the people making this production, we're trying to anchor everything in a truth and give the magical, wacky, wondrous world of Oz, just like in the original novel, give it a currency and a reality and a sense of truth that we understand. And so the audience will be coming primarily for a really great night out, but hopefully along the way, their experience of the play is really enhanced because they recognise that there's a truth and a sort of anchorage in all of it. And we're not just painting pretty, spectacular stage pictures. They're coming from a place of real authenticity, and we feel that's really important. And so this idea of this consumerist world where everything's sold and branded, that is the truth of the Wicked Witch of the West in our production. And again, that has a sort of contemporary currency, which I guess is important and interesting. So we carry on the journey along the yellow brick road, and you can see that, you know, everything's sort of storyboarded and you know, has a sort of detail in our modelling and our creation of the world. We've sort of imagined the gates of Oz like Checkpoint Charlie. So again, sort of we're moving on from the 1950s a little bit and playing with sort of Cold War history and all of the iconography of that. Again, so it's enjoyable for us as a creative team sort of creating that reality, but it also has a sort of resonance. Then when we get to Oz, we've got these huge flown pieces which come flying into the space. We've not only got scenery that's moving across the space, but we also have huge pieces of scenery that fly into the space. We've sort of imagined the Emerald City as the most hyper sort of version of maybe if you imagine Tokyo or Broadway in New York, a sort of the most retro, futuristic vision of a huge metropolis that you can possibly imagine. So in the projection in the background, you'll have little sort of AirPods, you know, taking people from skyscraper to skyscraper. You can see all the sort of advertising hoardings, which again we've seen sort of on Route 66 on our journey to Oz. But here in the Emerald City, where it's all about show and artifice, and again, our friends who are searching for their identity and their sense of their place in the world, they're sort of told that, you know, unless you get blinged up and unless you have your hair and makeup and clothes done, you can't visit the Wizard of Oz. So again, these ideas of social media, the way we present ourselves to the world, this book that was written at the end of the 1800s speaks to us today. And I hope all of you sort of studying our production and learning about the journey we've been on with this production, I hope that will excite and inspire you, that you can see, yes, it looks spectacular and all of that, but it also really says something about our world, our society today, which is really interesting and makes, you know, theatre the great art form that it is, that it can entertain and inspire, but it also asks us to think about, you know, the world today. Can't see what that is, but here we meet the great all-powerful Oz. And so you may remember from the previous slide of the model, we've got these huge letters OZ, which are like the gates to the kingdom of the Wizard of Oz, and they will fly out and part, and then behind that you will see this huge sort of brain exploding with ideas and authority and creativity as the great Oz sort of presents you know, his image to the world. Again, in Oz it's all about image, and you can see here this was an early sketch that Colin created where he'd drawn on his iPad a sort of depiction of how he imagined it to be before then sort of modelling it up into a 3D version which we can lift in and out of the model and imagine, you know, where everything sort of flies in and how it all sort of moves across the space. And again, we can show you as part of the presentation a picture of the ground plan, what we call the ground plan, which is basically Imagine the sort of most complicated map you can think of, and it has all the bar numbers where all of these flying elements fly in. It has all of the tracks in the floor where all of the automated pieces of scenery truck on and off from. So my job as a director, the designer's job, is to work out how all of those things move through the space in a seamless and magical way. And then when our incredible stage manager, Paul, and DSM, deputy stage manager, Anne, arrive in rehearsals a bit later on when we get going with it all of us together will work out how to navigate, to fly in these things, make sure it's safe, make sure it's happening on the right bar of music, etc. So it's a huge jigsaw that we're constantly putting together. And there you can see another really groovy, sort of cool image created by our designer Colin. And again, it's sort of thinking why does the wizard create this huge, imposing image of himself? Because, you know, hashtag spoiler, we learn in the second half that he's just a regular guy. He's just a man. He's just a single person. Why does he need to present this huge image of power and authority to the world? And of course, it's born out of this idea of protecting his kingdom of Oz. You know, the Wicked Witch, who we've talked about, who is this huge business sort of oil magnate, if you like. She is a threat to the kingdom of Oz. And so the wizard presents this image of stability and of authority and real sort of power, I guess, to ward off an invasion from the Winkies and the mutants and the Wicked Witch. And again, so you get a sense of how relevant and how current this story is, as well as presenting really incredible stage pictures and telling this story in a really vivid and imaginative way. You also sort of get a sense of where it's all coming from in the original source material, and how, as the production team, we're drawing out all of those strands to tell this story in a way that serves the material, but also really makes it hopefully relevant and exciting for all of you here and now in the 21st century.